What's up guys, gals and non-binary pals, it's Lovenji here once again, and you may well have seen my other videos, either on tournaments or just random games where I'm getting beaten by much better players, that the loadout of a game of Populous is severely restricted and watered down from the vast expansive world of Populous that you might know from the single player. Rather than rebalance the spells, because at the time the code was largely a black box that nobody could touch, the community decided which spells should be on and which should be off. The original ideas and foundations laid by Bullfrog were to have individual maps with individual spell loadouts, but this has been changed to one spell and one building loadout that instead has minor alterations to it. The spell panel goes from this to this, whilst the building panel goes from this to this. There are exceptions and variations to this, but in the main, this is what you will experience when playing Populous online. Whilst there may be some argument about the terms I use here, most arguments are more acts of pedantry than there is serious deviation. So let's start talking about the metagame of Populous. Like chess, you can think of the metagame as 3 stages: the opening, the midgame, and the endgame. Also like chess, games can be decided way before you reach the endgame, but it is still a phase of the game that does exist, and one where you should understand what to do. So the opening for Populous the beginning consists of a few tasks that all have to be done and completed at the same time. You have to pick the initial huts that you build, the conversion of wildmen if there are both wildmen and the convert spell enabled, and dismantling. Dismantling is considered an intermediate technique, and thus that will be covered in a later video, so don't worry about that for now. With map experience comes great knowledge. The wildmen are pseudo-random in where they run, but their starting location is always the same. Play a map enough times and you'll learn the clumping spots for groups of wildmen. The goal here is to get as many wildmen as possible with as few converts, but it's a careful balancing act, as you don't also want to hold your convert for far too long, as this will affect your population growth. The convert phase, like many phases within a strategy game, is something you master with time. Meanwhile, whilst you're doing your converts, you'll want to establish your huts, training huts, and guard towers. Another beautiful thing about Populous is that the order in which you do these things vary from map to map. It can make the game fun to replay, but it also makes the game very hard to teach. As such, there will be later sections which will be done in a podcast style format, which will be done with professional players such as Babbo to talk about specific map tactics. On Pressure Point, for example, towers and a Fire Warrior hut should be some of the first plans that you place. On other maps like Four Walls, which is the map you see in the video here, you can actually build a couple of huts first so you have the ideal location for the Fire Warrior hut available to you. On top of that, you'll want to decide what your opening spell is. Again, this is very dependent on the map, but typically, if you have a path to reach your opponent, your first spell is going to be either Earthquake or Tornado. In 90% of scenarios, it will be Earthquake. Once that first Earthquake is loaded, you'll either want to use it as soon as possible or begin charging some auxiliary spells to help you use that first Earthquake well. It really depends on what your opponent's defense is like. The rest of the early game is reactionary. You have to watch out from sneak attacks by Shaman's stealth walking, that is, walking by using the spell out of range so that the Shaman doesn't utter her iconic Ka, as this can often set you back quite a bit. It's also important to remember that empty towers are useless, so on top of building the Fire Warrior hut and those towers, you have to include training Fire Warriors to fill those towers for them to be of any use. A useful hotkey here is shift-clicking the building on the buildings panel, which will send the selected units to the building you clicked on, so you can grab Braves and shift-left-click the Fire Warrior hut to train them, and then grab those Fire Warrior huts and shift-click the tower icon to send those Fire Warriors to towers, although it may not prioritize the best towers to fill, so some players still prefer to manually fill their towers. The mid-game is the transitionary period where most players have fully built out their main bases, and it's where the game becomes slightly less linear. All players will have troops out on the map and their shamans will be real threats to watch. They are now wielding dangerous arsenals of spells that can help them penetrate even clusters of towers. As the mid-game begins, there are two primary goals for the player. The first is to find a way into your opponent's base to unleash your spells, and the other is to look to create new land for additional huts and multiple training huts. More training huts increases your troop production, so it has a benefit for players to build multiple of. It also makes it less likely that you're going to lose access to a troop type in a single attack. Creativity is rewarded in the mid-game, and those land bridges that you might expand with could actually be used to open up multiple paths. You could open up a side door, a back door, create a ramp, or lower a hill. Perhaps you want to create ghost shamans, misdirect your opponent and launch a devastating combined assault of warriors and shaman. Perhaps you want to separate your army from your shaman and force your opponent to choose whether to answer the army or the shaman. There are no strict rules as to what exactly you must do here. You'll be looking to use a combination of earthquakes, firestorms, and tornadoes to decimate your opponent. If you're successful, you can easily triumph before you hit the endgame. So with that said, what is the endgame? Well, there isn't actually always an endgame in a Populous match, as your opponent may give up and just outright lose before it happens. But the endgame is an interesting and high adrenaline situation where all players have taken substantial hits, all players are trying to recover their tribes, and all players are trying to transition away from shaman-based play, regardless of their starting playstyle. That, for me, is the defining moment that makes Endgame in Populous exciting. You'll see warrior huts going up all across the map, players desperately trying to rebuild their tribe as warriors roam, cutting down and massacring any braves they come across. If you're in a late scenario, your goal is to never stop building, which you should be doing at all phases of the game anyway, but it's especially important during late game. Avoid clumping your braves in a single location where they may be easy to take out. Constantly build and replace your huts. Try to establish a steady and solid production of troops. Fire warriors in huts are an incredibly effective answer to warriors roaming around your base, as it can soften them up greatly and allow your own warriors to take a triumphant victory in a warrior versus warrior conflict. Typically, the tribe who stabilizes this constant hemorrhaging first will be the one to be the victor. By no means have I covered every possible situation and scenario you can encounter in Populous, but that is a very light, high-level overview of our metagame and what it looks like. Perhaps now, some of the tournament shoutcasts I've done will mean a little bit more to you as you can see these phases in play. I've been Lovenji. Bye for now.